G'day, thanks for watching, and I hope you're well wherever you are in the world right now. One of the key points I pick up on from watching a whole heap of camera reviews that the reviewers always refer to is whether or not the camera has a single or a dual card slot. It's never really been a major issue for me because mainly I'm an amateur and I do some enthusiast and some professional photography. But I've never really had a problem with data writing to the cards or not, and I certainly haven't lost any photos in a professional context, although it's always out there on the horizon. You're waiting for the moment that it's going to happen to you. Well, recently it did happen to me, and it makes it a little bit more of a priority now that I think about it. I want to tell you about it, so I will. Yeah, so I watch a whole heap of camera reviews and always start talking about whether or not there's a single or a dual card slot. The preference being that there's a dual card slot. So you can write to either two cards at once to have a backup of your main data, or whether or not it's going to jump from one card to the next when one card becomes full, something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure because I never had a camera with a dual card slot. The fact of the matter is most cameras just have the single slot. And I guess predominantly it's only the more expensive or the higher grade cameras that have the dual slots, or the most recently released ones, say in the case of the Canon R5 or the R6. I'm shooting on the R right now, it has a single slot. Now, like I said, I haven't really had too many issues with having a single card slot. The photos always write to the card and that sort of thing. Sure, I've had cards corrupt where I haven't been able to access the data on a PC, but then with the use of a myriad of recovery programs out there, it's actually not too much hassle to try and get that data back off those cards. It's just that you can't trust the card after that, so it's a bit of a, what am I going to do with this now, you know? Recently I was shooting a job. It was a paid job, a professional job in the city here in Wellington, the 21st, and I ran into an issue with my SD cards, and it's not really something I've thought of before, because usually I've thought about this being an issue with the data after it's written to the card, something on the card failing after that point, not necessarily missing the shots at the time. Now, when I'm doing paid jobs, this may just be me, and it may be absolutely ridiculous as far as you're concerned, but I like to use multiple cards. I like to shoot for a while on one card and then pop it out and pop it in my bag and pop it in the new one so that I know the photos on the first card are safely tucked away. They are there, and whatever happens in the camera is not going to corrupt those from that point on. And consequently, in doing that, when I buy the cards, I tend to buy lots of smaller cards, 32 or 64 gigabytes. I've got a couple of bigger ones, 128 gigabytes, but I tend to use the smaller ones on the jobs. Well, I have up until this point. And so the issue I had this particular night was, a bit of background, the woman who was celebrating her 21st birthday was gifted a fabulous car by her mother. I mean, it was a real remarkable moment, and they were coming down the stairs to go outside onto the street to see the new car, and I was snapping along the way. But as we got outside to the street, I noticed the camera stopped making noises, so I looked at the back and it said card full. And I thought, oh cripes, and I quickly popped the card out, I popped the new card in, and started resuming shooting. I ran into a separate issue in that the card I put back into the camera was already full. So you can tell I've got a bit of work here to brush up on how I go about this process. So I popped that card out, I put a new card in, and then I resumed shooting. And so all was well. It was only later when I got back home, because the first thing I do after a job is I dump my cards onto the computer and then transfer it across to a separate hard drive. I've got that side of the system all down pat, you know. I want to have my photos in two separate places before I go to sleep for that night. And that's what I did. But in doing so, I noticed that there was a whole block of photos missing, right from the point that the birthday girl was handed the keys to the car up in the venue, and all walked down the stairs with her mother, and then coming out onto the street and first seeing the car. There's moments of excitement and joy. They were all missing. The only ones I had was her standing by the car after that sort of whole sequence had occurred. And I couldn't figure out what had happened because the car had only become full once I was down on the street. And sure, there was about 15 to 20 seconds while I was trying to jiggle the multiple cards while I put the card that was already full back into the camera, so that mini debacle there. But really, that hadn't interfered with too much. I should have had all the photos coming down the stairs and coming out onto the street, that sort of thing, but I didn't. I figured there was probably about 30 or 40 photos missing from that sequence of activity that I was there to shoot. And then it struck me. It was like a sledgehammer to the head that I realised what had happened. Coming down the stairs of the venue and out onto the street, I've been snapping away profusely, and at that point I was riding the buffer. Now the EOS R has got a pretty good buffer. I shoot RAW and JPEG, but the buffer's pretty good. But it occurred to me that during that period of time I've been riding the buffer doesn't buff the photos and also reserve space on the card. The buffer just buffers the photo and writes. But as soon as it writes to the end capacity of the card, it stops. And the buffer doesn't sit there and wait. The buffer doesn't write anywhere else. It doesn't get held in any sort of residual memory or anything like that. As soon as that card is full, your buffer is counting back on itself, and those photos are disappearing into the ether as fast as you can think. As soon as you pop the card door, the photos are gone. Your buffer is gone. The buffer was gone. And as I say, that's not really something I've ever thought about before. I've never thought about what might happen if you're writing the buffer at the end of the card. Hey, I'm not the expert in everything to do with photography, and I'm still learning, and I hope you're watching this because you are too. But it's definitely something to consider. One thing I'm going to consider now is making sure that I have sufficient capacity in the card when there's these important sequences coming up. I usually do that, but in this case it was fly by the seat of your pants sort of stuff, and it's really easy to forget things like the capacity on your card while you're thinking about all the other things such as composition, the light, where the people are, trying to capture the activity. Are you going to shoot wide, medium, tight, details, whatever, all these other things? Is your white balance okay? Are you shooting the right? Have you got the flash settings right? Have you got the shutter speed? Have you got the aperture, the ISO, all of those things? So the capacity of the card comes way down the end of the list, at least it does to me. But it was certainly a new experience to see that you're going to lose a block of photos by writing the buffer. And that's essentially it. It's just a cautionary tale. It's a real life experience. It's an anecdote from me to you that you can take and incorporate into your shooting. If you're shooting events or weddings or any professional jobs and you have a camera with a single card slot, I don't have any double card slots. So it does place more reliance on that single card. But not only that, you have to manage your buffer. You have to manage your buffer. I have to manage my buffer. I have to manage my buffer. I have to manage my buffer. You have to manage your buffer. You have to manage your buffer. You have to manage your buffer. Or at least you have to be aware of it. Yeah, I'm really trying to think practically how I could avoid this happening in the future, and I'm really not sure that I can, unless of course I use multiple high capacity cards. But I mean, eventually there's always an end to everything. What if I go for a job and I don't do what I usually do, replacing the cards periodically depending on the moments and that sort of thing? Or maybe I should just put the high capacity card in there and just shoot for woe to go, just shoot from go to woe, and just be done with it and not worry about it. Look, there are a myriad of things that can go wrong in photography, or unexpectedly, or not produce the results you're looking for, and it's about how you manage those situations and react to them. In the moment, I thought I did really well swapping out the cards. I mean, I made the mistake of putting the full card in, but everything was back up and running really quick. And I guess I take that from my own tactical training in the past in terms of reloading weaponry, because that all has to happen really quickly so you can be back up in the fight, ready to take that next shot when you need to. And the same applies with cameras. I reload the card of my eyeline. I'm ready. I'm still composing the shot. I'm still seeing what's happening while I'm doing all the activity in front of me. But it doesn't change the fact I lost all those photos writing the buffer. Right in the buffer. I'm a buffer writer. Don't be a buffer writer. That's it. It's a cautionary tale from me to you. Writing the buffer will cost you photos if you reach the end capacity of your card before the buffer has written. There we go. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. As I say, subscribe if you want to. We're coming out of Wellington, New Zealand, so it could be a different perspective. Otherwise, as always, knock out that like button, and we'll catch you on the next one.